Hey, ladies and gentlemen, we're here to talk about economics, politics, foreign policy, veterans issues, reform the criminal justice system, and drug laws. This channel probably will offend you, but most importantly, this is where socialism comes to die. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to talk about the Ukraine and Taiwan. But before we get started, please like, subscribe. Let me know in the comments what you think of my videos. If you don't like what I have to say, please let me know what you dislike about it in the comments. And please go ahead and hate watch. It doesn't do anything to help the channel. All right, before we get started, I know it's been a minute since I made a video. So to my subscribers that have stuck with me and helped build the channel, thank you very much. From this point forward, it'll either be videos on Monday and Wednesday or Tuesday and Thursday. We'll get back on schedule. Now, what's going on in the world today is very similar to the appeasement from about 1936 to 1940, the lead up to and beginning of World War II. Appeasement was a plan by Prime Minister Chamberlain, which is what he, to quote him, would lead to peace in our time. What it actually led to was the Japanese continued occupation of Manchuria to the point which led to them combat with the Soviets in Asia, leading up to the attack on Pearl Harbor. In Europe, you had German appeasement, which is they looked the other way when they annexed the Sudetenland. They looked the other way when they rolled back into Alsace-Lorraine, leading up to the actual invasion of Poland, which led to war being declared. So you tell me, did appeasement work, or did it buy a couple of years for a few people? Because in the end, it was somewhere between 70 and 85 million people had died through World War II. That's combatants and non-combatants due to war-related famine and disease. You'll find a lot of different numbers out there, but what I tried to encompass was everybody that was affected by it, because it's not just soldiers. Civilian populations are the most affected, and we will see the same thing if Russia rolls into Ukraine or China tries to steamroll Taiwan. Now, why is this important? This is important because with confidence, you think everything is unstoppable. The map behind me shows, it's a slightly older map, but it shows the Russian positions near the Ukrainian border. We know now it's over 100,000 troops just between the Ukraine, just along the border. But that doesn't count these Russian troops that have been invited into Moldova and Belarus because of things that have been happening there. Now, at this point, the Ukraine is not a NATO member state, but just north of Belarus, you have Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, who are UN member states. On the other side of the Ukraine, you have Poland, which is, I'm sorry, they're NATO member states. You have Poland, who is a NATO member state. One of Putin's arguments is, and it's the same argument Stalin used at the end of World War II, was that the Russians need a boundary between Western Europe and themselves. Now, to a point, it's understandable. As a United States citizen, we have the privilege of growing up in a country which is bordered east and west by oceans, north and south by Canada and Mexico, who we've had pretty decent relations. I mean, there's been issues off and on, but for the most part, we've had good relationships with through the last century, century and a half. So what happens when the Russians steamroll into the Ukraine? Well, one, the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which they want to run from Russia all the way through to Western Europe, Germany in particular, they can sell more fuel, which means their economy grows, which means they're in stronger competition with the United States and China. And there's something valuable to be said for that. By the same token, you have the Ukrainian people themselves. And historically speaking, the Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union. Prior to that, it was part of the Russian Empire. Putin himself said over 20 years ago, the worst thing that happened in the 20th century was to follow the collapse of the Soviet Union. What he envisions is rebuilding somewhere of a crossover between what the Soviet Union was and what the Russian Empire was. Now, the people victimized by this economically will eventually be Western Europe, but the immediate impact will be the Ukrainian people. Once they're taken over by the Russians. And once he does that, what's to stop him from saying, well, NATO didn't do anything. They're not going to stop me. I already got Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia cut off. Let me go ahead and invade them because they're much smaller than Ukraine, and we already did that. Well, what's next? Poland was in the Soviet sphere of influence. So is Poland next? The problem is, if you do not stand up to people like this, it's like a bully in high school. Until they're stood up to, they're going to keep doing what they want to do. And by doing that, other people will pay the price, eventually economically, but the people in those countries almost immediately. Now let's flip to the other side of the world, sort of, because understand how big the country of Russia is. It goes from Europe crossing over into the Asian landmass. But China and Taiwan. China has already attempted to control all of the South China Sea, which means they would control all shipping through there, which means Vietnam, the Philippines, all these smaller countries would be underneath the toe of China to ship any of their goods anywhere else in the world. Taiwan is a small island nation, which several Western countries and some Asian they've played a tight wire game with Taiwan. They haven't truly recognized that it is a separate country than China since it was founded in 1949, but they do offer some support. Now, by some support, financial, military, there's some treaties, but nothing major. Now, China has over 1 billion people. Their problem would be transporting their soldiers from mainland China to Taiwan, which is something they're working on. But the government of Taiwan is a free, democratically elected government. Ukraine is the same thing. So at what point do we allow a communist neo-dictatorship like China, or a really strange, the voting in Russia is really strange. Putin is very popular, and Putin has captured a feeling of nationality. He's built a feeling of nationality in Russia, which can be a good thing. But they do hold elections. The candidate base is usually limited, but there has never been any foundings of major corruption in any of their elections. He is extremely popular with the Russian people, but they respect strength. They respect power. And by allowing him to take over the Ukraine, which would lead to a takeover of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. And no, I'm not trying to do a domino comparison that we used that got us deeper involved in Vietnam. I'm not trying to use that comparison. What I'm trying to say is all these nations with freely elected leaders will be under the thumb of another country where they will not be allowed to have free elections. Their freedoms will be stripped from them as they were under communism, as they were under the feudal system of the czars during the Russian Empire. Or in the case of Taiwan, that would just be increase the population of work camps, concentration camps, whatever you want to call the camps that the Chinese have the Uyghurs in. Because remember, in China, all these woke SJWs in the United States are worried about all this oppression and everything else. It doesn't matter when it comes to China doing it to a minority population. They'll still buy their products. They'll still cheer for socialism and communism and Marxism. But what you see going on in China with the Uyghurs and other minority populations and Christian populations, what you see in Russia with them condemning and imprisoning members of the LGBT community, that is simply going to be transposed on these other countries that we allow them to take over. Now, am I saying that we should immediately go to war with China and Russia? No, I am not. I will say that as a veteran. I will say that as a father of somebody who's currently serving. I will say that as the uncle of someone who's in boot camp right now. What I do know down deep is this is very similar to a Cold War scenario of, I do not believe the Russians or the Chinese want to go to war with NATO as a whole or the United States in particular. Not because in the end, it would be a long and drawn out conflict, millions would die, and very little would be accomplished. It would be like the War of 1812 on a much larger scale. And if you're interested in what I mean by that, let me know in the comments and I'll do a video on it. It's kind of a weird dynamic. Now, what can we immediately do to try to affect this? Well, soft power, which would be embargoes or sanctions, have an effect to a point. But ultimately, sanctions and embargoes generally affect ordinary people far more than they do the leadership of those nations. But there was an announcement a few days ago that there were 8,500 troops on notice or on alert to possibly deploy to Eastern Europe. Well, this isn't that unusual because the military keeps a set number of people on alert. It could be an 18-hour, 24-hour, 48-hour cycle that they will come in, load up all their equipment, and fly off to somewhere. I lived that cycle for many years, many alerts, many training drills. Now, if the United States and Western European countries were to increase their troop numbers on the ground in the Ukraine, in Estonia, in Latvia, in Lithuania, in Taiwan, it would lessen the chance of a Russian or Chinese attack. Because what they do not want to do is create massive casualties for these countries outside of the one they are trying to invade. Now, people will say, but Bill, come on, that's going to cost us more taxes. We pay for training for the military year round. They do various training events. They go all over the world to train. With using light airborne air assault brigades to train in the Ukraine, Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, along with striker brigades, that could be part of a normal training rotation. In the Pacific with Taiwan, you have the Marines from San Diego and from Hawaii. They could do training rotations to Taiwan. In the end, you would pay maybe a little bit more for training, but we would have a better trained standing military based on regional focused training where they're actually working with these people in these militaries that if the balloon ever did go up, they would be working with to fight and win a war. Just my thoughts. In the end, if we allow Russia to steamroll Ukraine and allow China to steamroll Taiwan, the biggest losers will be the United States and Western Europe. Economically, we have our own issues going on now, and they're not getting any better anytime soon. So let's not add to them. When we start allowing the Russians to have a larger supremacy in energy, it's just going to keep growing and growing and growing. And eventually, these other governments will start facing what happened in Greece. It's just something to think about. If you would like to go deeper into the history of the Russian-Ukrainian relationship or my comparison to the War of 1812, let me know in the comments. Please like, subscribe, share with your friends. If you don't like what I have to say, hit dislike, tell me why in the comments, and then go ahead and continue to hate watch. It will not help the channel at all, I promise. Yes, my fingers are crossed. With that, everybody have a good evening, and remember, to he who much is given, much is expected. So every day, try to figure out what you could do to make your community better. Y'all have a good evening.